Hello all, welcome back. We are continuing with our weekly portion review, and this week we are in the portion of lecha, go forth or go for yourself. And this portion really is the conversation God is, calling on to Abraham, who eventually changes his name from Abraham to Abraham, and his journey with his wife. Also, we have a name change over here as well. They go down to Egypt, which is a very fascinating story. His separation from Lot. There's the war of the kings themselves. There's the covenant that Abraham has with God. There's the dramatic story of Hagar and Ishmael, and there's of course the circumcision covenant as well. So obviously in the book of Genesis, all our portions are robust with tremendous amount of detail and stories. But as we usually do, we're going to focus on one element. And I want to focus, or I'll try to focus on really the connection between building the Tower of Babel that we spoke about last portion and the emergence of Abraham onto the scene. There's a midrash that actually mentions that Abraham was participating in the construction of the Tower of Babel, the Babel project, but once realizing its improper orientation, he goes on to do his own thing, and that sort of brings us into this portion. And we have to remember that human societies are always generally defined by a unifying principle, right? And when a principle changes, the collective identity changes with it. And the name itself also changes. Now, in the last portion of Noah, we first encountered the term families, and later we've encountered the term nations. When we see the sons of Shem, right, they're called the sons of Shem by their families and their languages in their lands according to their nations. This is in Genesis 10, 31. And the difference between these two is actually quite profound. Between families, the norm is peace, right? And conflict or war is generally the exception. And between nations, the opposite is true, right? War is the default, and peace is the miracle that we're always hoping for. Now, we know famously that the prophet Isaiah, he is, looking forward to the day when nation will not lift a sword against another nation. But what really lies at the root of this shift to get to that point? Now, the Torah hints that when a group's defining characteristic is culture, meaning their languages, this forms family. But when the defining characteristic is territory, meaning their lands, it becomes actually a nation. And humanity's fall from families to nations really represents the spiritual descent, right? A loss of a shared moral language, replaced by this pursuit of power and land, ultimately. And against this backdrop, there's these two responses that appear to the problem of war, right? We have the Tower of Babel, and we have the calling of Abraham. The first, as we know, fails. The second redeems, and hopefully we're still in that redemption process. Now, the builders of Babel ultimately sought to erase all the differences, right? We know that the whole earth was one language and one speech, but language here in Safat doesn't express the deep meaning, but an external conformity, right? There's a cosmopolitan uniformity that is flattening the individuality and really silences any sort of diversity. And when a human is trying to participate or to build unity by erasing uniqueness, then they really replace the value of man, right, and the glory of the whole human enterprise with a tower itself, right, the structure. And this is really, you could say, the birthplace of sort of a totalitarian mindset, right, which is unity through uniformity. Now, Hashem's response, God's response was not to punish, right, but to actually save. He wanted salvation. And he shattered their false unity ultimately, and by doing that, he's restoring individuality. And at that point, once he did that, no man could understand the speech of his fellow. That's what the Bible tells us. Meaning humanity was saved from the hell of being the same all the time. Now, in contrast to that failed attempt, we have Abraham's mission, which was not to abolish nations, but actually to redeem them, right? What does God tell them? So I will make you a great nation, and through you the families of the earth shall be blessed. And unlike the nations of the world, whose nationalism divides and conquers, as we were talking about, Abraham's nation is meant to heal and unify, right? It's there to restore humanity to its original state of families. And this is the only legitimate form of nationalism, really. One that elevates rather than dominates, ultimately. And we also see that other prophets like Zechariah, right? He envisions an ultimate fulfillment to this mission, right? And he talks about how all that remain of the nations that came against Jerusalem should ultimately go up year after year. And then he says, and if the families of Egypt do not go up, etc., etc. This is in Zechariah 14. But he's talking about even Egypt as this family, meaning in the end, nations will not disappear. They're actually going to be transformed back into families, each in the ideal sense, retaining its own voice, its own color, all united under Hashem, under one God. And by doing this, really, we place the cosmopolitan uniformity of Babel and the conquering of nationalism of empires, right? Instead of that, the Torah presents Abraham's vision, which is unity through diversity, which we talk about often over here. And this is the idea of the oneness of Hashem that's reflected in the expression of humanity. And in our time, right, especially in the shadow of the recent war, this message feels, very urgent. And the world again stands between the tower and Abraham, between a dream of a global uniformity that really denies differences and the call to build unity through holiness, family, and faith. And Israel has really paid a terrible price for simply existing as people that are bound to a covenant and not by conquest. Yet, from this pain and this loss that we've experienced, something ancient, I would even say, and holy has actually reawakened inside Israel. The sense of a shared destiny, of mutual responsibility. I would even say there's the percolations of spiritual clarity, right? That we're standing in these ruins of the rockets and shattered homes and shattered lives. We still see families that open up their doors to strangers, to soldiers, embracing one another as brothers. And the communities across the world are starting to stand as one, as a family. And that's what we're hoping for. And this is ultimately the light of Avraham, or the light of the people of Israel, right? It's supposed to be rising from the dust of Babel, right? A nation called not to dominate, but to bless. And we're not trying to erase others, but to really remind them of their true foundation of peace and recognizing the divine image in every single person. And the world is watching Israel rebuild. Not a tower of, and I hope we don't build a tower of us being pride and our ego, but a home and a place of meaning. And through that home, right, as the promise to Abraham was told by God, that the nations of the world will be blessed through you. I'm wishing us all a Shabbat Shalom. Take care.